the advisor for African Studies. Oh, good. Thanks for hitting that record button. We are recording so that, you know, if you don't want to show your picture, if you want to change your name or something like that, it's just for students who want to hear this but aren't able to attend. Anyway, so welcome. Yes, I'm the advisor for African Studies. We also have Drew Medvid present. He's the admin assistant for African Studies. And on behalf of Russian and East European Studies, Global Studies, African Studies, we welcome you to this event. If you haven't heard about us before, please come check us out. We have amazing certificate opportunities and so much more. So check us out. But for our event today, we want to talk about careers. So we have the lovely Priyanka here with us from Chemonics to talk with us. And she graduated with an African Studies certificate from GSPIA. That is the School for International and Public Affairs here at the University of Pittsburgh in 2019. So Priyanka is a senior associate at Comonics and has 7+ years of international development management and field experience in Lesotho, India, the Philippines, Egypt, Mexico, Denmark, Spain, Greece, Germany, and the US, examining gender, youth rights, governance, countering violent extremism, climate change, child protection, migration, and education in fragile and conflict affected areas. Join us as she discusses her career journey and development experiences. So welcome, and she's going to further introduce herself and just share with you. So, and what we'll do is she's going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. So there'll be lots of time for questions. So write them down if you think of something as she's talking.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's so nice to meet all of you and to think that I was only in your position just a few months. Well, it feels like a few months, but a few years ago. So as mentioned, my name is Priyanka. You can call me Pri. I'm really excited to talk to you about some careers in the field of international development. Specifically in my role right now, I work for a government contractor, and I'm looking forward to telling you more about that. For this session, I would love to keep my time minimal so that I can also speak to you about different paths in international development, because I've worked both as a consultant for the United Nations, I've worked for small NGOs on the ground, and then now working for a corporation that does development work. So I have a little presentation that I'm going to share with you. Share screen. Okay. Share. Now do let me know if you cannot see my presentation. We're good? We're all good? Thank you so much. So yes, a career in international development contracting with me, Srinivasa. And feel free to find me, and we can talk about that after on LinkedIn. So a little bit about myself. I graduated with a master's in international development in GSPIA. I started in 2017, and I was able to come in because of a wonderful FLAS fellowship that came through the Global Studies Department to work on Hindi. And then I graduated with African Studies. I focused at Pitt, specifically on my passion, which is gender. And I also took the opportunity to do research through one of the working groups that we have that are housed within GSPIA. And if you are not a GSPIA student or a master's student, that's okay. I can explain a little bit more about that and that opportunity to speak about some ways to get involved, because many undergrad students also got involved with the practice. And so I came into GSPIA after I had done some work after undergrad. So I went after undergrad here in Washington, DC, where I'm based right now. I went to the UK to do my first master's in very theoretical work in anthropology. And then after that, I kind of jumped consultancy to consultancy, which has been really exciting in India, in Denmark, in the Philippines. And I also, after then I came to Pitt because I wanted to strengthen, I had all these great experiences in the field, and I wanted to take those experiences and get more policy and more program development and international development skills. And what's great about Pitt is it is an APSIA school, which means that within the world or within the graduate programs of public affairs, Pitt has an incredible reputation. I'm from Pittsburgh, so it was nice to be with family and to pursue my studies. So with all of this really great work that I've been able to do on, on the NGO level, how did I go from doing work that's really deeply on the ground to now working for this large corporation called Comonics? Well, a big reason was I wanted to understand how the US government funds development projects around the world. And I will get right into that. So what is Chemonics? When I was an undergrad student and even at Pitt, we learned a lot about how NGOs are structured and how the government is structured and public affairs is structured. But within these elements, right, the US government is funding these projects. There is also a Lego piece, if you will, that connects the funding from the US government in agencies like USAID, for example, and these large contracting firms that do the operations to connect with subcontractors, organizations that are technical specialists to implement projects. And do let me know, and feel free to either interrupt now or after my presentation to get me to talk a little bit larger of how these structures work. That is fine with me. So Comonics is a for-profit corporation that is an international development consulting firm. What that means is, as I mentioned, USAID, OTI, and we also work with UKD. That's the United Kingdom's version of UK development, or similar to USAID, providing aids around the world in bilateral agreements. We manage that funding. We do the operations, the administrative, the compliance, so the contractual elements, and any procurement that needs to happen in the field. Our projects and our themes are extremely varied. So at Comonics, we have the GHSC PSM team, which is the health team. Within that, we have the public health team. And then we also have a supply chain team that does, whether it's providing retroactive medication around the world, HIV medication around the world, whether it's, COVID training and distribution to communities in the Philippines, to El Salvador. Comonics has a breadth of 80 plus countries and a staff of 5,000 employees, both in our office here in DC and also around the world. So that's what Comonics does. It is, think of it as almost like a network or a connectivity pad that connects USAID funding to do implementing and to roll out projects on the ground. And so I wanted to also get a little bit deeper of how we make money. So as I mentioned, we bid. So we work on something called new business, where we're writing proposals in order to fund ourselves. So the US government has an agreement with a country. I work specifically in the Philippines and Indonesia and in Sri Lanka. And sometimes, so the government or the mission will have an agreement with that country, a 5-year agreement of what sorts of issues they're going to cover. In Indonesia, a lot of it is connected to environmental justice and access to rule of law, access to good governance. I work in Sri Lanka, so some of that is good governance, again, gender equality. And so the mission will put together proposals, and then we'll call on these large firms to bid on them. And so we work on these proposals, win these proposals, win the bid, and we have a 5-year contract where we are able to implement both our project in the ground, and we're able to also grow as a company, pay for things like trainings and for conferences. So just so that you understand exactly where the money and where the funding is coming from. And that's how we differ from a non-government organization. And that is why we are considered a corporation. So how is Comonics structured? Within Comonics, we have project management units, and Comonics is at its element, at its core, is an administrative organization where we provide operations. That means we are doing things like procuring. I'm working on a procurement right now to get a type of license or a cloud license to be able to do videos for our public administrators in Indonesia. So it's things, my day-to-day looks like putting together procurements. It is training on or learning how to do compliance and making sure we're following the contract of the US government, and doing any sort of administrative and backstopping. So ensuring that our short-term consultants are getting paid, making sure that their contracts are in line. So I'm within the project management structure. So we have a director, a manager, and a senior associate. I am a senior associate. We also have 11 practices. So that means that we also have in-house experts, and many of the tasks that they do, they are either working on proposals and ensuring that our proposal structures or our technical elements are sound, but also if there are any reporting that needs to happen in the field, that they're able to go and get that reporting done on our project behalf. We also have support divisions. So those are the finance and accounting team. They're the ones who are pushing for money to be sent across the country or across the sea to different countries. And then we have new business teams, and the new business teams are the ones who are liaising and ensuring that our proposals are going well. So what that means for me is that I am in charge of both doing project management work, and I also have to contribute to new business on top of my proposal, or on top of the projects that I'm on. I also write proposals. So right now I work on 2 projects, but whenever there's a need, there is a cycle of working on a proposal for 3 months to 4 months. And those are really, really intense times. So there are many firms in international development like Comonics. As I said, we are not an NGO. We are competing for these bids, and our subcontractors are NGOs like Save the Children, or we're working with the American Bar Association. So those are smaller organizations that we identify and we have partnerships with and we fund. So we're competing in the bidding process with organizations like Creative, DAI, Tetra Tech. If you're interested in environmental work, they're our biggest competition. They're also our biggest competition in Asia. So I do love Chemonics, but if you are also interested in just the world of contracting, there are many firms out there as well. So my advice, of course, is to put to cast your net as far as possible. Another one is MSI, which has been recently bought out by Tetra Tech. DAI, which is our biggest competition, and DT Global. So these are some of the firms that are within this really interesting space of development. So why join Comonics? Well, Comonics is a leader in US government contracting, and being in undergrad and in graduate school, I never considered this as a potential career. I always saw myself either in the NGO world or in the government, because those were the funding structures or the organizations that I knew that existed. But this is a whole nother animal that is within the pipeline of development. So it is a leader of US government contracting. People at USAID or within the US government know Comonics very well. It has an incredible network and great training. It is a world-class institution. What that means is at Pitt, I studied a lot about gender equality and the technical work, but I never was trained or never really learned about human resources or or administrative tasks like understanding a budget, even though there is a budgeting course, but I just didn't have the opportunity. But Chemonics does a great job of training us to the point where at Comonics, unlike other institutions, there is a clear direction in where you're going with your career within the company. You start as an associate and then you become a manager within 1 to 2 years, and then you become a senior manager. So what people really like about working at Comonics is you know where you're going. You can identify the mentors who can help you get there. And there is quite a linear way of being able to go higher up in the company that sometimes in NGOs, you have to move across companies or move out of the NGO space, almost like a zigzag, in order to get higher within your career. And it is a very fast-paced, team-focused environment. It's a lot of young people who I work with. Your managers will be around your age. And so it's a really exciting millennial company, if you will. And there are, well, with COVID, there are a lot of opportunities to travel. All my travel was cut this year, but I was supposed to be in South Africa for a conference. I was supposed to be in Sri Lanka and in Indonesia. And I think once COVID is lifted, hopefully we will have more opportunities to continuously travel. And then also if you're on new business, as I had mentioned, you can also travel to those countries that you're working on proposals. So these are the reasons why Chemonics. And since you are my fellow Pitt family, I also want to share some things I wish I had known about Chemonics. So why not Chemonics? Well, at times it can be a rigid scope of work. If you are someone who loves a lot of creativity, sometimes you can be faced with challenge, or you could think of it as a new way of working. But at times your work can be quite rigid. There is little opportunity on the entry level to be doing technical work, whether that's research or developing projects. That's something that becomes a little challenging, especially when you come out of Pitt and having such an exciting time doing the research that you do, and then you transition. Oh, hello.
Hello.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if there was a lag. We're good? Okay. Okay, great, thanks. Then also I had mentioned new business. Some people really love new business, and sometimes some of my colleagues are not so hot on it, because on top of our project management work, we're also in this really intense proposal phase. There are some firms, as I had mentioned, here, that have similar structures and do not have similar structures. Creative, for example, the proposal team does not work like the rest of our competitors. When you're on the project, you're just on that project. You don't necessarily need to write proposals. For some, that's really good, like really, that means better work-life balance. And for some, they miss that element. So just so you know, and if you have further questions after, feel free to reach out to me. And then, the reality is working in contracting, the work-life balance can be a challenge. If you want to start a family, or you're thinking down the line about settling down, there are some people who do transition out of Comonics because of, there's just, at times there are times where I do work until 12 in the morning, or there are days that I do work the weekend but that's mainly around proposal time. So those are just some things to keep in mind, and something that in the international development field, that is something that we as an industry do talk about in terms of work-life balance. So yeah, here's my little table, just comparing them. We can talk more about that. When I was out of Pitt, there are many things that you learn about yourself when you when you start working in the job market, or like identifying the kind of jobs that you want. Some people really love high-paced places, and if that's you, I definitely recognize and want to say that Comonics is great for you. There are also a lot of really cool opportunities to do things that are not international development related, learning about budgets, doing financing. I have a lot of colleagues who really found out that their passion was human resources. I have 2 colleagues in specific, and they were able to transition outside of doing international development work. And one works in New York now, working on diversity and inclusion hiring practices for a Fortune 500 company. So there are the alumni who leave, or people who have left. Your network is really strong, because there are people who end up doing all sorts of interesting and exciting things after they go through Comonics. Yeah, that's what I have so far. Thank you so much. Do let me know if you have any questions. Please hit me up on LinkedIn, and I look forward to having a conversation with you about all your questions about international development, your questions about some of the things I presented today, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Priyanka. So you guys, we will just open it up now to questions. I know I have a bunch, so but some of you guys might have some burning questions, so I'll let you guys go first. So anyone who wants to do a message, you can either raise your hand, or you can write it in the chat, whatever you prefer, or just speak it. So it looks like Cheyenne says, "Thank you so much, Priyanka. Sadly, I have to jump off." Okay. No question from her. Any questions?
I guess I would just ask if you can talk a little bit more about what your day-to-day would be, and maybe go in a little more detail about like the whole like proposal process, and then like what happens after.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So my day-to-day will be going through my emails. I currently work in Asia, so there is a time difference of 12 hours. And so that means it's quite quiet during the day from our field office. And then, of course, at night, we have a slew of things. As an associate, my main role is to liaise between the field office and our project management unit, the PMU unit. And we have tasks that are episodic, and we have tasks that are cyclical. So I'll talk about the cyclical work and what that means. So every month we have our financing and our budget to do. In the beginning of the month, we will have all of our expenses from the field office coming in by the 1st or the 2nd. And so my job is to review all of that information and to make sure that everything is in compliance. So I match it to any invoice that is attached and make sure that it's all in compliance, and try to see if there are any errors, whether it's in the documentation, and making sure all the information is there, because we do get audited by the US government. I think I should step back and talk about how this fits within a project, or what you think about a project. So as a student, maybe interested in international development, maybe you've looked on US aid and looked up, oh, what's happening, or what sorts of projects are taking place in countering trafficking of wildlife. Let's just say that's your passion. And so you look up a report and it shows like, oh, there's this great project called BIJAC that's which is building the capacity of the Indonesian government for protecting and promoting biodiversity. Oh, this project has been happening for 5 years. They're doing all of this really interesting technical work. There's an entire part of that project that is connected to advocating for national parks. There's an entire stream that's connected to the hornbill protection. There's another stream that's connected to palm oil, or preventing illegal palm oil. So that's what is happening on the technical side. In order to do all of those things, the architecture of Comonics allows for that to happen by, as I said, the procurements or the administrative parts or managing the entire field office. So my job is to make sure that all that happens. So as I said, the invoicing and making sure that all the purchases that happen in the field office make sense or are in compliance. So that's the first month for the budget cycle. By the second week, we will have our draft invoices, which means I review that. And then I start entering that into our budget tool. And then by the last week of the month, I submit all this information to USAID and say, hey, this is in compliance, this is what we've reviewed, and this is what we're billing you for. And so that's something that happens, that's like a rotation that happens around the month. So those are some of the things that I've like scheduled into my calendar and I know what's going to come. But then there are also episodic things. With COVID, for example, we have our advisors who are on the project who are from the United States. And each country has their own law and their own system of how they're handling COVID, right? So in Sri Lanka, it's currently protecting its people has been done through the muscle of the military. So the military has been enforcing and ensuring that people are not violating curfew and that they're unable, and making sure that they're wearing their mask and making sure that they're being safe. So that meant that one of our advisors, he's staying in Sri Lanka, and then one of our other advisors had to be repatriated back to the United States. There's also an issue in which the airport was shut down. So I have to coordinate and make sure that our chief of party, who is playing this leadership role, that he is safe and taken care of and his hotel is managed and he has access to medical care if he needs it. And then ensuring that our deputy chief of party, also playing an advisory and leadership role, is able to be expatriated back to the United States. That's something that's quite episodic. And in those moments, we have to be a little creative and think about what are the laws and what are the regulations in Sri Lanka, and really being a subject matter expert really quickly and how to handle that situation. And then also doing the same with the United States and with the US government, to prevent things like corruption. On the proposal, so proposals are really exciting and there are a lot of opportunities for you to write and do many things. So within a proposal, there will be either an RFI or an RFP, like a call for applicants for the proposal that comes out of the mission. And our new business team, they're keeping their ear on the ground. They know people in the mission and they're trying to understand trends. And so the proposal will come out through USAID. And so then the new business team will staff the proposal team. You'll have someone who is a technical writer. You'll have someone who writes almost like a literature review about all of the things that Comonics has done in that country to really say, hey, we're the best for this position. Then we have things like the management section, which is how are we actually going to execute this project? Who are we hiring? So all of these things need to be staffed, and we have to write the sections in a turnaround of sometimes 3 months, and sometimes it's a month. So it can be quite intense, but it's a really interesting process because you learn how to write really well, and you learn, I think really importantly, how to write for the US government. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. And let me know if I'm speaking with too much tacit knowledge, because when you're in the belly of the beast, a lot of the way that I'm thinking, it took me a long time to learn how all of these machines work together.
Okay, we also had a message in the chat from Emily. Do you know anyone working in the health sector at Chemonics, and what is that like?
Yeah, I do. I can, if you reach out to me, I can try to put you in touch with a friend and a colleague of mine who is currently working on a project in Malawi for, I think it's HIV/AIDS. When I first met him, he was doing tuberculosis work in the Philippines. So the portfolios, one thing you should know about Comonics is what you know, or like what your technical expertise is, or your interest is. You have to sometimes be on projects that are so different from what you're used to. So my friend and colleague Matthew, he hadn't worked in health before, and now he's the director for the health team, or for a health project. It's a really exciting it's a really, really exciting place to work for health, because as I mentioned, you have two parts to the puzzle. Either you're doing community development health work, so that could be working on a PEPFAR funded project on preventing HIV work in the community. So you are working with a field office that has a lot of people who know how to do community outreach. Or you may be on a project that's specifically focused on distributing medical tools and training. The project management units work similarly in that the work that we're doing in terms of administrative work or operations is quite similar, but in the health team, there is also that added need of understanding supply chains and understanding how to distribute, medical equipment, or distribute medicine in itself in a safe and proper way, and sometimes in conflict zones, which is really interesting and exciting work. So it does look similar to your day-to-day, but there is that added element. And then another part to be cognizant of is the contracting may look different. And these are things that you learn on the job, that there are just different types of contractual obligations that you will learn about. For example, I have colleagues who work a lot with children, and so they need to have legislation or some sort of project documentation of how they are working to ensure that there's no countering of children. Similarly, I think that there are also elements within the health teams where they have to talk about like bioethics and things of this nature for their projects. So that's something to look into.
That's really helpful and interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Adam, I saw your hand up next. And
I think
Stephanie
Steph was before me.
Stephanie, okay, she's on like my left side for whatever reason. I didn't see her. So Steph, go ahead. Thanks, Adam.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Pri. So I'm actually applying to GSPIA for the Masters in International Development right now. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about your overall student experience there and how it prepared you for what you're doing now and just generally for the field of international development.
Yeah, Steph, that's a great question. We are really lucky with Pitt because we have incredible resources and professors that are available to us and really want to support us. So I would definitely encourage getting to know your professors and their work, both academically and also thinking about their own career trajectory, because many of them are practitioners. I had the wonderful opportunity to work closely with Dr. Muge Finkel, who is currently the head of this practice that I mentioned, the working group, the Gender Equality in Public Administration Working Group. I joined that because I was really excited to work on some real-time policy, working on real-time policy, working on gender equality. So within the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, one of those goals is Goal 16, which is good governance. And part of that is ensuring that on all levels of decision making that there is representation. So we were tracking public administrations around the world. It was an amazing opportunity because I got to play with data and work with data. I'm an anthropologist by training. So what was really missing in my in my work skills or in my work was definitely understanding how to implement or utilize data. And this gave me the opportunity to the point where I got to present at the UN and also consult and work with UNDP over the summer, which led to some really amazing connections and friendships. So highly recommend joining a practice. There are many different practices. It's been a while, so there are probably so many interesting and exciting things that are coming out. I remember one of my closest friends was working on a working group that was about human trafficking and tracking what was happening, like a hackathon on human trafficking, which was really cool. So identify some opportunities and connect it to your work. So those are two things I would recommend. The other thing I would recommend is really take advantage that you're a student. And what I mean by that is there are special hiring streams that are specifically to students that once you're out, you are unable to use those to get your foot in the door. And they're really great opportunities. If you're interested in the State Department, I highly recommend doing a State Department internship because it is a great way to get your foot in the door. And one of the things that it was between working at UNDP and the State Department. I chose UNDP, which of course, like I really loved, but it's also a great way because the government really loves, especially this administration, it seems, really loves to hire people that have gone through those systems. If another thing, and I don't know if there are undergrads here or what year some of you are in, but there are all sorts of really cool, if you're interested in doing an extra year to your study, fully funded, the Boren is another great way of getting language skills, going to a foreign country. I don't know what it looks like now with COVID, but yeah, I'm not sure now. Of course, my information is dated from a pre-COVID world, but definitely taking opportunities as students. And one word of advice is never doubting yourself because you're a student or you're an undergrad. Just take up the opportunities and just grow from them and have a growth mindset. Other skills that I take, classes that I would recommend taking, if that's helpful, definitely try to take both years of quantitative. Even though I didn't, I think it's a great backup plan because there are a lot of positions that, not at Comonics, but in the government, for example. I have a friend who ended up working for the census, and the only requirement is that you have 2 semesters of that, and it's a great government job, and they're always looking for people. It's actually one of the government agencies that are just consistently looking for people. So I'm giving you advice of things that I also wish I could have told myself looking back. That's what I told my sister. She's in graduate school right now. And now she's taking 2 semesters of some sort of stats or quantitative study. And then my last advice is just keep being hungry and find opportunities to do what you love. If you love doing health, like do as much health stuff as you can. If you're interested in gender, like get your hands messy and work locally too in Pittsburgh, and just find all those opportunities connected to what you love.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Yeah, no problem.
Go ahead, Adam.
Hi, Pri. My name's Adam. I'm a GSPIA student. I'm a part-timer since I work at Pitt as well. But I'm curious to know, thinking of it from if you could kind of take a step, I don't know, outside of yourself to see what you think Chemonics saw in you. And I'm wondering how you think that they value the resume versus your skill set versus okay, this is somebody that might be able to handle some of the tough working hours, or somebody that has that kind of the right energy that we're looking for, and then we can kind of teach them some of the skills they need on the job. I'm curious how you kind of see that balance in the workplace.
That's a great question. Comonics is what is great about Comonics is that it is really invested in its entry level or early level career folks and then takes them up, right? Do not feel discouraged if they say, like, this is also for other students here who are undergraduates who may see requirement for masters. I have many colleagues who are not master's students, so feel free to apply. Okay, so to answer your question, what I think is good, I think what makes you a strong candidate is to be able to connect to what is in the scope of work. So if you don't have all the international development experience, do not worry about that, because they're looking for someone who can understand budgeting, who can multitask, who is good administrative. If that meant that you were working over the summer as a, like, doing administrative work at a local office, and that you were doing budgeting and compliance, those are the skills that they're looking for. And if you have a passion for international development, I think you can definitely bring that to the table, if that makes sense. Because I know sometimes now I'm in the position where I'm writing some of those job descriptions for field positions, and I've worked on Recruit for field positions mainly, but it's given me a different perspective sitting and writing or evaluating, as opposed to being on the side of proposing myself for a position, if that makes sense. So really think about the skills that are needed, some of those hard skills. And when I say hard skills, things like the budgeting and the administrative work, even as I said, like, you don't have to have necessarily worked for another firm like Comonics, but demonstrate that you've been able to do some of that work in your, previously, and come across as someone who's really interested in development. And, the position that I applied for, 5,000 people applied for, and don't feel discouraged if you don't get the job or get the interview, because I've been there. And I can, you feel that you're a strong candidate, and you probably are. And it's sometimes challenging because maybe it's someone who is an internal hire, because at Chemonics, we do a recruitment and we do it internally and externally. So do not feel discouraged, really show, even if it's not international development or even public policy related, say and explain in your cover letter how that is connected. And then now I'm a resource. So if you have an interest in applying, feel free to reach out to me, and feel free. One thing I also noticed is that people are really happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. Just shooting that message and saying, hey, we went to the same undergrad, or, I have an interest in the environmental work that you're doing. I would love to grab a virtual coffee. I think especially now, because people don't have an excuse that they're outside of their office, I think this is a good time to have virtual coffees. And this is advice that I have gotten, and hope that when I say that I have done these things, or when I suggest them, it's because I've definitely tried the things that I'm telling you right now, because I wasn't so far away in my job. My job search.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
So I have a question that kind of piggybacks a little bit on Adam's question. And it's because I imagine that one of the enticing factors for Chemonics to hire you was the fact that, sure, you graduated from GSPIA in 2019, but you also had 7 years of previous experience, right? At least that's what it said in the introduction, I think. And so my question is kind of, I want to know a little bit more about, and you already touched on it, but I'd like to hear if you can elaborate on it a little bit, what the 7 years of experience entailed, and kind of your motivations at each point, because I think I remember you said you jumped around from consultancy to consultancy. I'm just kind of curious as to hear what the motivation was at each different path.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. So as I mentioned, I started out I started out in undergrad at American University in 2010 to 2014. And when I was a student there, I was also a research assistant for a professor for 3 years. So I worked for Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, and I worked on a book with him that was on tribal Islam and on the war on terror. And so I realized very young that I was really excited about writing and research and policy. And so I thought I wanted to be an academic. And so that's why I went into my my first master's, because I wanted to be an academic. And I also should mention that throughout my undergrad, I tried to find as many fellowships and opportunities. If you're an undergrad, I highly recommend a fellowship called Humanity in Action. I did that fellowship when I was a student. You can also do it as a master's student. You have to do it, you can do it, I think, after your second or third year of undergrad. And that looked at human rights, specifically the refugee crisis from the perspective, and now they have a fellowship on examining racism in the United States, but looking at some of these quote unquote wicked problems from the perspective of human rights. So when I was there, I got to do some research as well. And so I realized, like, I want to be an academic. I went to the University of Cambridge. It was incredible and I loved it. I finished my master's and I was to do the PhD, and everything seemed great, but my work was extremely theoretical and I was going more into heritage policy. My work was examining really, really theoretical work on how objects, like how they get buried underground. So I was studying Hindu nationalism. That was my focus. I was really interested in political religion and how this affected women and children, and specifically how religious riots affect women and children, and how objects are being pulled out of the ground and how that changes. And it's like a political process. It was really theoretical. And so I wasn't sure if I wanted to be doing really theoretical things at the age of 23. And so I ended up landing a contract with the Smithsonian. I was hired to redesign the Freer-Sackler Museum, which is so different, but not so different from international policy and development, because I was specifically working to highlight how objects are really political too. And so I was working in the museum world and I faced a juncture. Okay, am I about to be a museum scholar, right? Because I was a curatorial fellow, and the next step would have been me being a curator, working towards becoming a curator, which meant a PhD or deciding if I want to be a museum professional. Then I was thinking, I'm 24. I don't even know what I want, which was exciting and wonderful. And then I decided after my contract to apply to be a senior fellow for Humanity in Action. There was an opportunity to now lead the fellowship. So I was hired to design the program in Denmark, specifically to examine Danish human rights issues and working with refugees. I was able to bring some of that interest and that work on like thinking about communities and bringing that from like my US perspective to Denmark. So I was on a team with 2 Danes, and this fellowship brings US students and European students together. So France, Bosnia, Germany, Denmark, etc. So I did that, and also did some writing for the local Danish Red Cross to examine their human rights work, specifically how they engage with volunteers in working with refugees. My contract ended. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I had a professor, and this is why having professors on your side who have lived multiple lives are very helpful. She connected me with India's largest education NGO. I was supposed to go there to specifically look at to develop some programming around gender equality. And turns out that they didn't have anyone to do monitoring and evaluation. So now this was in 2015 to 2016. This is 2016 to 2017. And then I was 24 at that time. And then I designed our monitoring and evaluation project, which is amazing. I got to travel all over India, but it was crazy. I didn't have healthcare and I lived on $400 a month. So it was definitely a consultancy that was definitely exciting and interesting. And I don't know at 28, about to turn 29, if that's something that I would do now, but definitely being young, I felt I would take the chance. And when I tell people about my time when I talk about my experience in India, I think that is my biggest selling point, because I have done the field work and I'm kind of the candidate who can say, I have seen development from the bottom up. I've seen it as someone where you've given me the money and I had to design the project. I had to kind of evaluate and move forward. So I think even though I took a chance that was really crazy, and definitely being of Indian American descent, my parents were a little concerned, like, whoa, that's quite a gamble. It did pay off in my case because I can say that I've done the development work. Then I came to Pitt. And so I had a little bit more clarity. What is it that I want out of my career? Where do I want to begin? I had the professors who are on my side and the incredible staff within our and advisors that are in our global studies and African studies project that could talk to me about what is it that I want out of a career? What do I want out of my experience? And getting a lot of input from professors really helped me frame what has seemed very lackadaisical in my early 20s and try to make something really clear out of that. So when I do say 7 years, it has been 7 years of professional experience, but it's also been really exciting and at times a gamble when you do consultancies, because sometimes you just don't know when the next one is coming. And yeah, I hope that answers your question. After that, after Pitt, well, during Pitt, I was funded by the FLAS, and there was an issue where I needed to find employment because the scholarship was awarded on a yearly basis, and unfortunately, my scholarship wasn't granted again. So I had to work full time while pursuing my final year of study. And I moved to Oregon for an amazing organization called Holt International that does child protection work. I needed to be closer to my family for personal reasons, because my grandmother was going to move to the US with us. And then that's when I decided to move to DC, apply for Comonics, and get my job at Comonics. So in sum, to kind of talk about how all of that has come, after my undergrad and after my first master's, I decided I really wanted to get the groundwork experience and really understand how the concepts that I've studied, like what does that look like in a country? And you know, you don't have to do something as crazy as I did, deciding to apply for a CSO, a civil society organization or a community organization in country. There are opportunities like the Boren Fellowship or other forms of either study abroad, but given COVID, you could even find ways in the United States to do similar community work. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does. You definitely have a quite astonishing resume. If I have a follow-up question, if nobody else has any questions, but I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk if they want to talk. All right, I guess I'll just ask my follow-up question, which is, do you see yourself at Chemonics in, I don't know, 5 years from now?
That's a great question. I've definitely learned a lot at Comonics, and I think it's a great launching pad for early level folks to get involved. I really do miss working on the ground. I think that's where my true passion is. This has taught me a lot of how home offices work, and this has really taught me how funding structures work. This is a really important skill, I think. But I love being in community, and I love working on the ground and doing the program development and the training. So I see myself transitioning back into that space, but bringing the skills and the knowledge that I have had from working from a large home office. But I think after jumping around and having a really exciting career on the ground, I miss that a lot. Yeah, good question though.
And so well spoken.
Oh, thank you.
You didn't really answer the question. You just said what you love.
Oh, the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty clear.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we got time for one more question. Does anyone have anything?
Well, if not, I just want to thank you all for having me. And I've been in your position very, very, very recently. And so I can understand, especially now with the pandemic, that it can be a little daunting. And I just want you to know that you do have resources. Feel free to have me as a resource, use my network, and do let me know what you're interested in, and I can see what I can help or just even listen. I will be a little out of office, or kind of, I'm moving. I'm in DC right now, but I'm moving into my new place. So I won't be able to answer until mid-March, if that's all right. But do feel free to reach out, and do reach out to your professors and to each other.
And Pri, tell them also how well do you use LinkedIn? Because I know when I got in LinkedIn, it was so easy to message you. Is that a good place for them to be putting up their profile and stuff like that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I am a huge proponent of any social media. I love social media. I think LinkedIn is awesome because you are able to just grow your network, like your classmates from there, and then your professors, and just see who they know. And then you can just keep expanding. It's pretty easy. There's some people who are really active on it, and there's some people who may not be so active on it, but it's always worth the try. People are on it because they're, at least in international development, it's definitely a big space where people are communicating, sharing ideas, sharing what projects they're on. Another great resource is Twitter. I don't know if you use Twitter a lot, but even just being plugged in with the conversation, seeing, I use Twitter a lot during GEPA, like the gender equality stuff, because I would message heads of departments if I couldn't find data. So feel free. I mean, people are using, in international development, people use Twitter to share their work and their research. So you can retweet them or tweet at them or go into their DMs and say, hey, I've been following your work. I'm really interested in hearing this, and I just really want to know what you're thinking about XYZ. And flattery goes a long way in our industry. So feel free to use LinkedIn. People want to help you because they weren't too far away.
That's great. And next week, we're doing this. The University Center for International Studies is having an event for LinkedIn. So if you guys need to work on your LinkedIn profile, make sure that you attend that event. It should be on the USIS calendar. If you just Google the calendar for USIS, and you can find it, but it should be really good. Anyway, well, thanks guys. Appreciate all of you for attending and asking great questions, and hopefully you learned something interesting. I know I did, so it's good.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Pri.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yep.